Yomi, Berakhot from the Koren Talmud Bavli. I know the light is not so good today. In the evening I just have this one little light. It works for me. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad arba sha'ot. So we're talking about Rabbi Yehuda's position in the Mishnah, chapter 4 of Masechet Brachos, that Rabbi Yehuda says that the latest you can pray, what's the time, until what time can you pray the morning service, Shacharit? Rabbi Yehuda says ad arba sha'ot. As everybody knows, we're talking about dividing from sunrise to sunset into 12 equal hours, so that would be the first third of the day. So the Gemara asks a question: Ibayed lahu ad va'ad bichlal, or dilma ad v'lo ad bichlal? So this is a very logical question. Are we talking about when Rabbi Yehuda said until, does that mean until and including the fourth hour? Or perhaps he meant until, when he says until, he means until and not including, in which case one may not pray during the fourth hour. So a little background. Rabbi Steinsaltz writes that the dilemma raised here is a fundamental problem in delineating halachic parameters. Parallel dilemmas are raised in other cases to determine the application of halachic parameters and to establish whether there is a set principle with regard to this approach, to their approach, or whether each instance is handled individually. So just in other words, he's saying there are other cases of ad v'ad bichlal, up to and including, or ad v'lo ad bichlal, up to and not including. And the question is whether there's a rule or there's not a rule, or each case is discussed individually. So that's the question. And when Rabbi Yehuda says until the fourth hour, does he mean including the fourth hour, or not? You're just up to the fourth hour, but not including the fourth hour, and the fourth hour would be forbidden to pray. Tashma, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ad plaga mincha. We have another opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in another place in the Gemara that says it's mutar to pray until plag mincha. What's he talking about? Musaf? Or is he talking about mincha? Let's go back to the Mishnah. No, he's talking about mincha. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the afternoon prayer, mincha, of course, we have on an average weekday, there's three prayers: Shacharit, Mincha, Mariv. Shacharit's in the morning, mincha's in the afternoon, and Mariv is in the evening. So the question is, until what time? There's times for prayer, and you only have, as we said before, you only get the schar, the reward for the praying on time if you pray on time. Otherwise, God is very pleased that you prayed. However, the angels are not going to write in to the little message to God that you prayed on time, and you don't have that special merit. So that's why we pray on time. It's a special merit. We're in tune with the universe. We're in tune with the sun and the stars, and everything in the this kind of everything in the universe kind of parallels everything in heaven. There is some sort of a system of times in heaven, so to speak. We don't really know what that means. So that's the way some people explain the times of prayer. So we're in tune with some sort of a heavenly order. So that of course it requires meditation, explanation, and this is not the time. So we're trying to find a resolution from a tashma. Come in here. Rabbi Yehuda says the afternoon prayer may be recited only until the midpoint of the afternoon. Now, granted that if you say that until means up until and not including, read in the lashon of the Gemara, I amrat bishlama ad v'lo ad bichlal haynu diika ben Rabbi Yehuda l'Rabbanan. Ela I amrat ad v'ad bichlal Rabbi Yehuda haynu Rabbanan. So, granted, if you say that until means until and not including the fourth hour, then there is a difference between the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and the opinion of the rabbis. However, if you say that until means until and including, then the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is identical with the opinion of the rabbis, as the end of the period that begins with the midpoint of the afternoon is sunset. So until plag mincha, or including plag mincha. Plag mincha is the midpoint of the afternoon until sunset. So if Rabbi Yehuda says until plag mincha, perhaps if he says ad ba'ad bichlal, if he says up to and including, that means that when Rabbi Yehuda says you can pray up until Plag Mincha, it means you can pray up until sunset. Elamai, the Gemara immediately rejects this proof. Rather, what is the alternative? That until means until and not including. It remains problematic. So what's the alternative? Ema Seifa. V'shal musafin kol hayom. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad sheva sha'ot. V'tanya, hayu lefanav shtei tfilot. Achat shel musaf, achat shel mincha. Mitpelal shel mincha v'achar kach shel musaf. Shezo tadirat v'zo ena tadira. Ena tadira. Rabbi Yehuda Omer mitpelal shel musaf, v'achar kach shel mincha. Shezo overet v'zo ena overet. So Rabbi Yehuda says the additional prayer may be recited all day long. We have the Mincha said Musaf. We just said in the Mishnah. Sorry, not the Mincha. The Mishnah said that Musaf, the additional prayer on Shabbat and festivals and Rosh Chodesh, may be recited all day long. There's some days we pray 4 times a day. The 4th prayer would be Musaf, such as on Shabbos. So let's say, what time is it permitted to pray Musaf? Until sunset. Okay, this is problematic. Rabbi Yehuda says it may be recited until 7 hours. The reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda is obvious. That if you wait until the very end of the day to say Musaf, when are you going to have time to say Mincha? As it was taught in Rabbi Yehuda says until 7 hours, as it was taught in a Braita, if the obligation to recite 2 prayers is before him, one the additional prayer Musaf and the other the afternoon prayer Mincha, he prays Mincha and then he prays Musaf afterwards. Because this afternoon prayer Mincha is recited on a frequent basis, and that the Musaf is recited in a relatively infrequent basis, as it's only recited on Shabbat, the new moon festivals. The principle states when a frequent practice and an infrequent practice clash, the frequent practice takes precedence over the infrequent practice. Again, the Gemara calls that tadir ve'eno tadir, tadir kodem. So Rabbi Yehuda says that that's the rabbi's opinion. You can only pray, you have a time when it's the afternoon and it's time for mincha, it's plag mincha, and you haven't said musaf yet. So what do? Do you say mincha and then musaf? Or do you say musaf and then mincha? So according to the rabbis, you pray whatever is more frequent, meaning mincha you pray every day, it's more frequent. Musaf is only on Shabbat, festivals and the new moon. So it's less frequent. So you take that principle and say, I'm going to do the frequent one, the one that comes up more, takes precedence, mincha, and then when I get done with that, I'll pray musaf. Even though, according to the order of the day, musaf comes before mincha. We pray shacharit, then musaf on Shabbos and the other days, and then mincha, right? So, but he didn't pray musaf and it's time for mincha, so then he changes the order. That's the rabbi's opinion. Whatever is more frequent, the mincha is more frequent, pray mincha and then pray musaf. Rabbi Yehuda says he recites the additional prayer first and the afternoon prayer thereafter, because the time to recite this, musaf, will elapse, and this, the time to recite the afternoon prayer, will not elapse. Now when we're translating it like this, it sounds funny, because this is, for reading it makes more sense, but some things are meant to be read out loud, and they sound differently, and sometimes when something is supposed to be read to yourself, it just, you see it visually and it makes more sense. So let me translate it in my own way. היו לפניו שתי תפילות, אחת של מוסף ואחת של מנחה, מתפלל של מנחה ואחר כך של מוסף, שזאת תדירה וזו אינו תדירה. If you have 2 prayers in front of you, one is mincha and one is musaf, first you pray mincha and then you pray musaf, because this is frequent and this other one is infrequent. Rabbi Yehuda says, mitpalel shel musaf achar kach shel mincha. Rabbi Yehuda says, first you pray musaf and then you pray mincha, shezo overet v'zo eno overet, because this one's time will elapse and the other one's time will not elapse. The afternoon will not soon elapse. The other one, the Rabbi Steinsaltz adds the word soon. The mincha prayer, you still have some time. He has less time to say musaf, and he has more time to say mincha, as you may recite mincha until the midpoint of the afternoon. But after the midpoint of the afternoon, I guess you're not supposed to say this. After the 7th hour, that's the end of the time of musaf. Okay, this is also difficult because when is plag mincha? Plag mincha is after the 7th hour. So how does that make sense? The relevant point is, granted, if you say until means until and including ad bichlal, then how can you find a situation where the time to recite two prayers, the afternoon prayer and the additional prayer, overlapping? But if you say until means until and including, again, if you say until up to and including, then how can you find a situation where there's going to be two prayers at the same time, overlapping? What kind of a question is that? If you say up to and including, then how are you going to find two prayers overlapping? So it's asking how exactly how are you calculating the times in each situation? Once the time to recite mincha comes along, a half an hour past noon, the time to recite musaf is already gone. Noon is 6.5 hours. 6.5 hours. We said musaf is until 7 hours. So there's that overlapping period of the half an hour. So again, this whole claim is rejected by the saying that musaf is until the 7th hour, because mincha time comes at 6.5 hours. What about that half hour? I'm adding that. Elamai ad bichlal kasha reisha. Rather, what is the alternative? Kasha reisha. What is the alternative that until means until and including? Elamai ad bichlal. What does ad bichlal mean? Kasha reisha. Then the first clause of the Mishnah is difficult, as explained above with regard to the midpoint of the afternoon. Mi savrat dahai plag mincha plag acharona ka'amar. Whoever said that the halachic difference between the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and the opinion of rabbis? Sorry, what is the halachic difference between the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and the opinion of the rabbis? The Gemara answers. Mi savrat dahai plag mincha plag acharona ka'amar. Do you think that when the midpoint of the afternoon is mentioned, it was speaking of the period following the midpoint, the last part of the afternoon? From an hour and a quarter before sunset until sunset itself? This was not the intention. Plag Rishona Kamar was speaking of the period prior to the midpoint, the first part of the afternoon, which is explained above, was from 9.5 hours after sunrise until an hour and a quarter before sunset. Consequently, until the midpoint of the afternoon means until the end of the first half of the afternoon period. And this is what he was saying. This is Rabbi Yehuda's question. When does the first half leave and the second half enter? From when 11 hours minus quarter has passed since sunrise. Rabbi Yehuda's use of the term until always means until and including. Amar Rav Nachman. Af ananami tanin. Practically speaking, this means that according to Rabbi Yehuda, it is permissible to recite the morning prayer until the end of the 4th hour. In support of this, in other words, based on what he's saying about Mincha, because Rabbi Yehuda was talking about the first part of the afternoon, and we know that Mincha is permitted until sunset, Rabbi Yehuda said until Plag Mincha. He doesn't mean until an hour and a quarter before sunset. He means until that Plag Mincha period of an hour and a quarter, and including that Plag Mincha, the second Plag Mincha period that lasts for an hour and a quarter. So that means that when Rabbi Yehuda says until, he means ad bechlal, until and including. Amar Rav Nachman af anu nami tanina. Rav Nachman holds the same way. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava he'id chamisha dvarim she mamanin et haktana v'shemesi'in et ha'isha al pi ed echad v'al tarnagol sheniskal b'Yerushalayim al sheharag et ha'nefesh v'al yayin ben 40 yom shenitnasech שנתנסך על גבי המזבח ועל תמיד של שחר שקרב ב4 שעות. A new subject. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava testified about 5 matters of halacha. When an orphan girl was married off by her mother or brother before reaching the age of majority or maturity, reaches the age of majority, she may refuse to continue living with her husband and therefore retroactively annul their marriage. So there's a difference between majority and maturity. Let's look at this a little in the Psak Halacha. 2 brothers were married to 2 sisters who were orphaned from their father. One of the sisters, who passed away at the age of majority, was betrothed to her husband of her own volition, and her marriage was by Torah law. The other sister was a minor, and her brother agreed to her betrothal in loco parentis, and consequently her marriage was by rabbinic law. In other words, the brother had the authority to marry, to be in place of the parents and marry off their daughter, his younger sister. If the husband of the older sister died, his brother would be obligated to enter into a leveret marriage with the older sister. You know, there's 2 brothers. One of them gets married, and then he dies before having any children. Then the other brother, or even if there's a number of brothers, one of them is obligated to marry in a leveret marriage that widow of his brother. That's even if he already is married and has children, he has an obligation to do yibum, to do a leveret marriage with her, and thereby continue the brother's line. So this is usually these days they perform a chalitza ceremony and release the brother, the living brother, from the obligation to marry his deceased brother's widow. So in this case, the other sister was a minor. Again, 2 brothers were married to 2 sisters who were orphaned from their father. One of the sisters, who passed the age of majority, was betrothed to her husband of her own volition, and her marriage was by Torah law. The other sister was a minor, and her brother agreed to her betrothal in loco parentis, and consequently her marriage was by rabbinic law. If the husband of the older sister died, the brother would be obligated to enter into a leveret marriage with the older sister. However, he would be forbidden to do so by prohibition of marrying 2 sisters. In this case, based on the testimony of Rav Yehuda ben Bava, they persuaded the younger sister to opt out of her marriage by means of the right of refusal, as the language of the Gemara was mema'anin. She can mama'en, or in Yiddish, mama'en. So she can refuse. In the case based on the testimony of Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, they persuade the younger sister to opt out of her marriage by right of refusal. She has the right to refuse, enabling her husband to enter into levirate marriage with the older sister. Why? Because he was already married to her sister. Okay, that's one. One may persuade the minor girl to refuse to continue living with her husband, thereby resolving the complications of the prohibition of marrying two sisters. Okay, the second thing that Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba testified to was that one may allow a woman who, after hearing of her husband's death and seeks to remarry, to marry based on the testimony of one witness, as opposed to two witnesses required for other testimonies in the Torah. So, a woman, her husband dies, they only need one witness that the husband has died. If she doesn't have any witnesses to the death of the husband, this is an agunah situation. It's very serious, and there are situations where expert rabbis can release agunot, women who are literally anchored to they can't get remarried because they don't have sufficient proof that the husband has died. It's a very serious situation and needs to be addressed. And I heard there's about 90 women Orthodox Jewish women in the United States today who are in such a situation. So one witness is sufficient because two witnesses would just be too difficult in a lot of situations. So perhaps even one witness is difficult enough. They could have DNA testing. There's also the question, if you can do a valid DNA test, this could also release someone from an agunah, but that requires, of course, an expert judge to rule on this case. That's the second thing. Va'al Tarnagol Shenasakal Yerushalayim testified about a rooster that was stoned to death in Jerusalem for killing a person in order to teach the Torah law in Exodus 21, which requires the stoning of an ox that killed a person, and that would apply to other animals as well. There was a killer rooster in Jerusalem. They brought the killer rooster to the court. The judge says, guilty, take him out and stone him, and that's what they did. Okay, and the Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba testified about a 40-day-old wine that was used for libation on the altar. According to halacha, when 40 days pass from the time the wine emerged from the winepress, it may be offered on the altar as a libation. 40 days. Before 40 days, you can't use wine for the wine libations in the temple in Jerusalem. And he testified about the daily morning offering that was sacrificed at 4 hours of the day. Although the daily morning offering was sacrificed before sunrise, under certain circumstances, it may be sacrificed until the end of the 4th hour of the day. Shmamina ad v'ad bichlal shmamina. We learn from the final testimony of the 5 things that Yehuda ben Baba testified to. We learn that they offered the tamid shel shachar shekra ba'arba sha'ot. Now, what does it mean ba'arba sha'ot? The Gemara reads the answer here that ad v'ad bichlal. That means up to and including. I don't see how shel tamid shel shachar shekra ba'arba sha'ot proves either way, ad or not ad bichlal. I don't see the logic here. Let's keep going. Amar Rav Kahana halacha k'Rav Yehuda ho'il v'tznan b'bechirta kavate. Based on this mission, Rav Kahana said the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, since we learned in the Mishnah in the preferred tractates. V'tznan b'bechirasa. B'bechirata means the preferred tractate. Otherwise, that's another name for eduyot in the Mishnah. That we learn in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion there. So we follow his ruling. Since the halacha is ruled in accordance with all the Mishnayot in eduyot, the opinion of a Tana who rules in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in that Mishnah means that the halacha is in accordance with that opinion. Va'al tamid shel shachar. So we take, in other words, the proof is it's in Eduyot, and we rule like Rabbi Yehuda there. So ad is including ad bichlal, and up till and including, meaning if sunrise is at 6 o'clock, then how long do you have to do the morning sacrifice, and how long do you have to pray shacharit to be on time? You have, there's some 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9, that's 3, and then 9 and 1 minute is already into, or 9 and 1 second even, is into the 4th hour. So you might think that you can't pray after 9 o'clock. If sunrise is at 6, and for some reason, and sunset is at 6 in the evening, so then you might think that the second after 9 o'clock, that's it. You've lost the Zman Tefillah. No, there's another hour because it's Ad Vad Bichlal. Al Tamid Shel Shachar Shekara B'Arba Sha'ot Man Tanad Lahadatanan V'Chama Shemesh V'Namas B'Arba Sha'ot. And about the daily morning offering that was sacrificed at 4 hours, based on this, the Gemara attempts to identify the Tana who taught that which we learned in the Mishnah about the manna that fell for the children of Israel in the desert. And they gathered in the morning by morning, each according to what he eats. And then it said, V'cham Hashemesh V'namas. And the sun grew hot and it melted, in Exodus 16. That, now we know that took place in the 4 hours into the day. The Gemara asks, do you say that the time when the sun grew hot was at 4 hours, or perhaps it was at 6 hours of the day? When the verse says, in the heat of the day, Kishu'omer kachom hayom, Genesis 18, 6 hare shesh sha'ot amur. 6 hours is already mentioned in the Torah as the heat of the day. 6 hours, not 4. Ha'amar ma'ani makayam V'chama shemesh v'namas ba'arba sha'ot. How then do I establish the verse that when the sun grew hot it melted? This must refer to the earlier time at 4 hours. Mani, whose opinion is this? Rabbi Yehuda, v'lo Rabbanan. This is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, not Rabbanan's opinion. I Rabbi Yehuda ad arba sha'ot nami tzafrahu. If this Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, until 4 hours is also considered morning, as he holds that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the daily morning offering may still be sacrificed then. While here he says that the morning manna was gathered, that in the morning the manna was gathered and it melted after the morning. So we have a little contradiction. If the manna is the same, then it melted after the morning. But according to the laws of the sacrifice, the morning is only up till 4 hours. But the manna was after 4 hours. If we're going by Rabbi Yehuda, then 4 hours is also considered morning. And if we follow the law of the rabbis, then morning is up till noontime. Apparently this is an entirely new position, a new discovery. Eureka! Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbanan. The Gemara says, if you wish, you say the Mishnah is in accordance with the Rabbi Yehuda, and if you wish, say that instead the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. Amarkra, Baboker, Chalkehu lishne v'karim. The Gemara explains, the verse states, morning by morning. It says somewhere in the Torah, morning by morning, divided into 2 mornings. Morning, according to the rabbis, lasts until noon. The repetition of the term morning in the Torah, baboker, indicates that the period when the manna was gathered ended at the conclusion of the end of the first half of the morning. That is, the end of the 3rd hour. In other words, the first half of the day is 6 hours, so after the 3rd hour, that's the end of the morning. But if you wish, say in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Hibayatem Rabbi Yehuda, Hai Boker Yitera Lahaktim Lo Shah Achat. Dekule alma miha v'chamesh shemesh v'namas ba'arba sha'ot. This extra morning, if you wish to say it like Rabbi Yehuda would say, the extra morning in this phrase, the second mention of morning, comes to make the end of the period when the manna was gathered an hour earlier. At any event, everyone agrees that the verse, well, why was it repeated a second time? To hint at something. Rabbi Yehuda, in his logic, which I can't understand, says that that second morning comes to include to make the end of the period, to refer to the end of the period when the manna was gathered an hour earlier. Hay boker yetera laktim lo sha'achat. Dekule alma mihach v'chamesh shemesh v'namas ba'arba sha'ot. In any event, everyone agrees that the verse, and when the sun grew hot and melted, referring to the manna, refers to 4 hours of the day. Let's see if Rashi says something about that. Baboker, baboker. Chaf Zayin Amud Aleph. There's a very long Rashi here. Oh, no, that's not about that. One moment. Okay, Arba Sha'ot Namitza. For who 4 hours is also considered morning. Daha Amrat Ad V'ad Bichlal Gabei Tamid Katir V'Taseh B'Boker. That's what we learned. Mishneh B'Karim Shelahi Loktim Ele Shalosh Sha'ot Rishonot. So there was one opinion of the Shnei B'Karim, Baboker, Baboker. When it talks about the manna, it says Baboker, Baboker. They would take the manna Baboker, Baboker. It could have said Baboker. Why did it say morning twice? Boker means morning, right? Why did it say it twice? Rashi says that's to teach that they only gathered the manna in the first 3 hours. A boker, baboker, not that boker, this boker. Okay. My mashma, the Gemara asks, from where is the inference drawn that this is the meaning of the verse? How do we know that we can read the verse that way, that baboker, baboker means dafka the first 3 hours and not the second 3 hours of the morning? Amar Ravacha bar Yaakov, Amar Kra, v'chamesh shemesh v'namas, ezu isha she shemesh cham v'hatzel tzonen. He says, you look at nature. Rabbi Yochanan bar Yaakov says, the verse states, when the sun grew hot, it melted. What is the hour that the sun is hot, but the shade remains cool? Ezu isha'a, she'eshemesh cham v'atzel tzonen, hevi omer ba'arba sha'ot. I'd say, when the sun is hot, but the shade is still cool, is at 4 hours in the morning. So we learned in the Mishnah, Tfilat mincha ad erev. The rabbis hold that the afternoon prayer may be recited until evening. Amar le Rav Chisda, Rabbi Yehuda says it may be recited until the midpoint of the afternoon. Rabbi Yehuda seems to say that mincha must, as the end last time for mincha comes earlier, and at plag mincha, an hour and a quarter before sunset. If it's advad bichlal, again, as we said earlier, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis are the same thing. The rabbis at any event say it's up till sunset. Amar le Rav Chisda le Rav Yitzchak, Hatam Amar Rav Kahana halacha ka Rabbi Yehuda ho'il utanan bibechirata kavatei. Rav Chisda said to Rav Yitzchak there, with regard to the morning prayer, Rav Kahana said the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Since we learned in a Mishnah in the preferred tractate, referring to Eduyot, in accordance with his opinion. Hachamai, but what's his ruling here? Ishtik velo amar velo midi. He was silent and he didn't say anything. Amar Rav Chisda necheze anan midarav metzali shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat mi'ba'od yom shma mina halach Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Chisda said, let us see and try to resolve this ourselves from the fact that Rav prayed the Shabbat prayers on the eve of Shabbat while it was still day. Ma'ariv of Leil Shabbat, Rav in Babylonia many years ago used to pray it before sunset on Friday night. Shema Mina halacha Rabbi Yehuda. So why was he saying Ma'ariv in the day? Because after the time of Mincha starts the time of Ma'ariv. Mincha is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, only until an hour and a quarter before sunset. And at that moment, it starts the time for Ma'ariv, which is still before sunset, obviously. Adarabba. The Gemara immediately rejects the proof based on Rav's practice. On the contrary, Midarav Huna Urabanan lo havu matzale ad orta. We find from the fact that Rav Huna and the sages, students of Rav, they would not pray until the evening. They're students of Rav. It's a very strong assumption that they would follow the way of their rabbi. That he taught them to do it that way. The disciples of the sages were very, very respectful, very, very serious about their tradition. They wouldn't depart from the teachings of their rabbis unless they had a very good reason to. Rav Huna and the rabbis who were students of Rav would pray Ma'ariv only after sunset. Shema Mina ein halacha Rabbi Yehuda. So then we say the law is not like Rabbi Yehuda. You may pray Mincha until sunset. Hashta de lo itmar hilchata lo kamar v'lo kamar de avad kamar avad de avad kamar avad. The Gemara concludes now that the halacha was stated neither in accordance with the opinion of the sage, neither in accordance with the opinion of this sage, nor in the opinion of that sage. One who acted in accordance with the opinion of this sage has acted legitimately, and one who has acted in accordance with the opinion of that other sage has acted legitimately. They're both just as good as each other. As this halacha is left to the decision of each individual. You choose for yourself, is what this Gemara suggests. What's the halacha l'maaseh? What's the practical halacha? Okay, it says in the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, or Chaim Reish Lamed Gimel, or 233. In the Gemara, the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis with regard to the time beyond one with which one may not recite the afternoon prayer until the evening, or until the midpoint of Mincha, Plag Mincha, was not resolved. Therefore, the Gemara concluded that each individual has license to conduct himself as he pleases, and whichever option he chooses, he fulfills his obligation. However, once he chooses, he is required to continue conducting himself in accordance with his own choice. Therefore, if he recites the afternoon prayer after the midpoint of Mincha, he may not recite the evening prayer until the evening. If he plans on reciting the evening prayer after the midpoint of Mincha, Plag Mincha, an hour and a quarter before sunset, the generally accepted custom is that the afternoon prayer may be recited until sunset. Again, if he plans on reciting the evening prayer after the midpoint of Mincha before sunset, he must recite the afternoon prayer before the midpoint of Mincha. But generally we say that Mincha is up to sunset. There are many congregations today in the summer when it gets very late, the days are very long, and you want to get home for Kiddush and Shabbos. So often on Erev Shabbos, on Friday afternoon, they'll pray Ma'ariv while it's still daylight, because it's 7 o'clock, and they want to eat, for their family and the children. So they'll pray Ma'ariv while it's still day, after Plag Mincha, they'll say Ma'ariv, and then they the Gabbai makes an announcement, say everybody make sure to say Kriyat Shema again after sunset. No problem whatsoever. And even there's I've seen some Sephardic minions that on a regular weekday, they pray Ma'ariv while it's still just sunrise, before sunset. It's like a half hour before sunset, they finish Mincha, they pray Ma'ariv, everybody's happy. Well, you just make sure you have to say Kriyat Shema Lamita, say this hero Israel before you go to bed at night. You've covered all your bases and you're acting like in a perfectly legitimate halachic way. Rabbi Ilka lebe gniva, v'tzali shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat. The Gemara relates a story how Rav happened by the house of the sage Geniva, and he prayed the Shabbat prayer on the eve of Shabbat before nightfall. V'hava matzali Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba la'achorer de Rav, v'siyam Rav v'lo paske litzlote de Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was praying behind Rav, and Rav finished his prayer but did not take 3 steps back and interrupt the prayer of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Shma mina mitpalel adam shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat. Shma mina mitpalel talmid acharei rabo. Talmid mitpalel talmid acharei rabo. V'shma mina asor la'avor keneged hamitpalelim. We derive 3 things from this story. We derive from this that one may pray the Shabbat prayer on the eve of Shabbat before nightfall, and we derive from this that a student may indeed pray behind his rabbi, and we derive from this that it is prohibited to pass before those who are praying. You're not supposed to walk in front of somebody who's standing amida. The law is not supposed to walk 4 cubits in front of him. You should be at least further than 2 meters. But if it's possible to walk from behind him without disturbing him, you should walk behind him while he's davening. Messiah le Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi demar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi asor la'avor keneged hamitpalalim. Ini v'ha Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi chalfi. Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi chutz la'arba amot hu dachalfi. The Gemara responds, this supports the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. As Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, it's prohibited to pass before those who are praying. The Gemara asks, is this so? Didn't Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi pass before those who were praying? The Gemara responds, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi were beyond 4 cubits from those who were praying, who they passed, like I said before. But Rabbi Yirmiyah hechi avidachi? On this particular detail, it was surprising. How did Rabbi Yirmiyah act that way and pray behind Rav? V'ha amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav le'olam al yitpilel adam lo keneged rabo v'lo acharei rabo. We learned that Rav Yehuda said, the Rav said that a man should never pray either next to his rabbi, side by side, or behind his rabbi. Because if he prays behind his rabbi, it might create the impression that he's bowing to his rabbi, because we have to bow in the Amida. That's the Tosfos. If he's lo keneged rabbo, sorry, it's not stand. He may stand next to his rabbi. That might, in some places, be considered arrogant even to pray next to, side by side to your rabbi. In some places, the rabbi is a low-key rabbi, and it's a low-key community. No. So it's perfectly permitted to pray next to one's Rav. When it says keneged here, it actually means, thank God for this translation, it says in front of his rabbi. You don't pray in front of your rabbi, because that's indicating that you're your rabbi's equal. You don't pray behind your rabbi, so you don't look like you're bowing to him. The halacha says a student may not pray directly behind his rabbi, before him, or alongside him. The halacha in Shulchan Aruch says that even you're not supposed to pray next to your rabbi. Beyond 4 cubits is considered a separate domain. So if you're 4 cubits away, roughly 2 meters away from your rabbi, it's okay. Some say this applies only when they're praying as individuals. When we're praying a congregation, if there's a regular seating arrangement, it's not a problem. So let's say there's a shul with a lot of seats in it, and it happens to be that your seat is in front of your rabbi's. That's not a problem, because there's fixed seating, and everybody understands that that's the way where the rabbi wants to pray, and anybody else can sit in the other seats as long as everybody gets along. Okay? But Rabbi Yirmiyah hechi avirachi? We read that. V'tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer hamitpalel acharei rabo v'noten shalom l'rabo v'machzir shalom l'rabo v'acholek al yeshivato shel rabo v'omer davar shelo shma mipi rabo gorem l'shchina shetistalek v'Yisrael. The Gemara says something very strong in a Braita. It says Rabbi Eliezer generally has very strong statements. Rabbi Eliezer says one who prays behind his rabbi, and one who greets his rabbi without waiting for his rabbi to greet him first, and one who returns his rabbi's greeting without saying, greeting to you, rabbi. One who rivals his rabbi's yeshiva, that is to say, establishes a yeshiva of his own and teaches during his rabbi's lifetime without his consent, and one who says something in the name of his rabbi which he did not hear directly from his rabbi causes the divine presence to withdraw from Israel. Shiny Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. With regard to Rabbi Yirmiyah's conduct, the Gemara says it was different. The Talmud Chaver Hava, because he was not a mere student. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba wasn't just a student of Rav, he was a Talmud Chaver, a disciple colleague, and he was therefore permitted to act in that way. V'hainu d'kamar le Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba l'Rav, mi badlat amar le in badelna v'lo amar mi badel mar. And that is why, on one occasion, when Rav prayed on Shabbat, the Shabbat prayer earlier, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba asked him, did you distance yourself from labor and accept the sanctity of Shabbat? Mi badalt, did you stop doing the malachas that are prohibited on Shabbat? Amar le in badelna. He said, yes, I have stopped. I distanced myself from it. Literally, badelna is to separate yourself. Separate oneself from weekday work. V'la amar mi badel mar. And Rabbi Yirmiyah, he didn't say, did the master distance himself? Mi badel mar. No, he said, mi badalt. He spoke to him in a familiar form as opposed to speaking to him as a disciple would speak to his master, or in our days even, as a Talmud, a student would speak to his Rav. It's a disciple colleague. This refers to a student, a Talmud Chaver. What is it? There's a Talmud, a student, a disciple, and a Talmud Chaver, a disciple colleague. This refers to a student whose growth in Torah stature ultimately rendered him his teacher's colleague. Nevertheless, he continued to treat him with deference that is, the correct deference due to a mentor. Sometimes this term refers to a younger individual who, due to his lack of experience, still relies on his teacher's oral traditions, but does not require his teacher's explanation of those traditions. Umi badel, v'amar Rababin, פעם אחת התפלל רבי של שבת בערב שבת ונכנס למרחץ ויצא ושנה לו פרקין ועדיין לא חשכה. Although Rav replied that he had distanced himself from labor, did he indeed distance himself from labor? Didn't Rabbi Avin say, once Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi prayed the Shabbat prayer on the eve of Shabbat until nightfall. He then entered the bathhouse and emerged and taught us our chapters that we had learned, and it was not yet dark. Rava said, Amar Rava, Hahu denichnas lahazia v'kodem gezera hava. So how in the world, if Rabbi Yehuda prayed the Shabbat prayer on the eve of Shabbat before nightfall, while it's still day, you would assume that he accepted the laws of Shabbat on himself, and then they see Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi, going into the bathhouse, that you don't go into the bathhouse on Shabbat. You don't you wash yourself before Shabbos. You take a shower, you take a bath, whatever, before Shabbos, not on Shabbos. I mean, it's permitted to take a shower on Shabbat if you do it according to halakha with only cold water, and you only use liquid soap, and you don't wash your entire body, and so then it's permitted. If somebody really needs to, he can take a Shabbos shower. We're not talking about that. We're talking about bona fide going into the bathhouse. How did Rabbi Yehuda allow himself to do it? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Rava said, he didn't go in to wash himself, he just went in to perspire. He was not doing what he normally does on a weekday. And he went in to perspire, and that was actually at a time when it was permitted to go into a bathhouse and perspire on Shabbat. It was only later that the sages of the Talmud got together and said, you're not permitted to go into the sauna on Shabbat. B'ini. Is that so? That he was actually required to refrain from labor? Didn't Abaye permit Dima bar Levai, to fumigate baskets with sulfur. Lekavrui sale, a basket is a sale. Lekavruya sale means to fumigate them. Even though he had already recited the Shabbat prayer, he permitted him to go and make the basket smell good with some smoke or something. I don't know. So he was doing labor, indicating that it's permitted to perform labor even after the Shabbat prayer. No, when we pray on Shabbat, we accept the laws of Shabbat. Lecha Dodi. This was actually before, and they didn't have Lecha Dodi back then. That was written in the 16th century. They just accepted the laws of Shabbat on the same. Boi kala. Come Sabbath bride, the Shabbat Malkata, Shabbat the queen. So that was enough. So that was a part of the prayer. So once they say that, they accept the laws of Shabbat. So how do we find Rabbi Abaya, the great sage Abaya, permitting Rabbi Dimi bar Levaye to fumigate baskets? Hahu ta'uta havai. The Gemara responds, it was a mistake, it was an error, he wasn't supposed to do it, Rabbi Dimi did not intend to begin Shabbat early. It was a cloudy day on that day, and he mistakenly thought that the sun had set, and that's why he had prayed. Consequently, even though he had prayed, the Shabbat prayer did not obligate himself to conduct himself in accordance with the sanctity of Shabbat, as he was allowed to perform labor, and consequently he was allowed to perform labor even after his prayer. Tahuta mihadra. The Gemara goes on to ask, can a mistake be reversed? V'ha'amar Avidan. Pamachat nitkashu shamayim be'avim ki sevurim ha'am lomar chashechahu niknasu lebet knesset vitpalel shel motzi Shabbat b'Shabbat nitpasru ha'avim v'zarcha ha'chama. Could a mistake be reversed to enable one to conduct himself as if he had not prayed? Didn't Avidan, a student of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, say, once the sky became overcast, leading people to think that it was in the dark of night, and they entered into a synagogue and recited the evening prayer at the conclusion of Shabbat on Shabbat. They said the Mariv and it was still Shabbos afternoon. It wasn't after sunset yet. And later the clouds cleared and the sun shone, indicating it was still the day. Uval v'shaul Rabbi, v'amar huil hitpalalu. Shani tzibur de la matrechinan lahu. They went to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. They said, "Wait, we made a mistake. What do we do?" Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, "You daven. That's enough." And with the tzibur, it's with an individual, he would have told him to go pray again. But with the tzibur, he didn't, because we don't bother our whole congregation. It's called tircha de tzibur. So Amar Rabbi Chia bar Avin, Rab Tzali shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat, Rabbi Yoshia Metzali shel Motzi Shabbat b'Shabbat, Rab Tzali shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat, Omer Kedusha alakos, o Eno Omer Kedusha alakos. Tashma, the Amar of Nachman Amar Shmuel mitpalel Adam shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat, Omer Kedusha alakos, v'hilchot hakavatei. The Gemara continues to discuss the possibility of reciting the evening prayer early on Shabbat. Rabbi Chia bar Avin said, Rav prayed the Shabbat prayer on the eve of Shabbat before nightfall. Rabbi Yoshia would pray the evening prayer at the conclusion of Shabbat on Shabbat. Rabbi Yoshia customarily would say Mariv before sunset on Shabbat. With regard to the fact that Rav prayed Shabbat prayer on the eve of Shabbat before nightfall, the dilemma is raised. In those cases, meaning saying Mariv on Shabbat early, before sunset on Friday afternoon. In those cases, did he recite Kiddush over a cup of wine, or did he not recite Kiddush over a cup of wine before the stars emerged? Okay, fine. So he prays Mariv early. He said maybe perhaps the main point is he can pray Mariv early, and then he has to wait for the stars to come out to say Kiddush over the wine. Rav Nachman said that Shmuel said one prays the Shabbat prayer on the eve of Shabbat before nightfall, and recites the Kiddush cup over the wine. And the halacha is accordance with his ruling. So, the halacha says, Kiddush while it is still day, one who began Shabbat before its designated time may recite Kiddush and eat the Shabbat meal before dark. As per the statement that Rav Nachman said, Shmuel said, in accordance with what the Gemara ruled. Some say that even if you make Kiddush before, you have to have the Suda going on into the eve of Shabbat until after the stars come out. Rabbi Yoshia Mitzali Shel Motzi Shabbat B'Shabbat Omer Havdalah Alakos O Eno Omer Havdalah Alakos Tashma Tamar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Mitpalal Adam Shel Motzi Shabbat B'Shabbat Omer Havdalah Alakos. Rabbi Yoshia would pray the evening prayer of the conclusion of Shabbat on Shabbat. After praying, while it's still Shabbos, does he recite Havdalah over the cup of wine, or does he not recite Havdalah over a cup of wine? Tashma, come in here. The resolution is this. Rabbi Yehuda said, the Shmuel said, one prays the evening prayer of the conclusion of Shabbat and recites Havdalah over the cup of wine. In this case, it's only if he has to run to do a mitzvah. If he has to do a mitzvah and he has to do the Havdalah while it's still Shabbat, he just says the Havdalah over the cup of wine. So right after the time when he can do malacha, he can do that malacha. However, he would not... of course, he can't light the candle. He can't say the blessing over the candle. If there's a candle still lit, you could say he could say the blessing because he's not actually lighting the candle, but we don't hold that way. And of course, he couldn't do any prohibited labor until nightfall. In the roughly, it's like a half an hour after sunset, when the three medium stars come out. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rabbi Yasi, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Amar Rav. B'tzad Amud Zei Palal Rabbi Yishmael b'Rabbi Yossi Shel Shabbat b'Erev Shabbat. There's a testimony that Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yossi, would pray Shabbat prayer on the eve of Shabbat before nightfall. Kiata Ula Amar B'tzad Tumara Hava V'lo B'tzad Amud Hava. But when Ula came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he related a different version of the story. He said that he had heard this transpired beside a palm tree, not beside a pillar. Rabbi, as I forgot to say, along this specific pillar, the previous testimony read, along this specific pillar before me, Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yossi, prayed the Shabbat prayer on Eve of Shabbat. He pointed at the pillar and he said, this is where Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yossi, prayed the Shabbat prayer before sunset. It's before the sunset on Friday night. But when Ula came and said, no, it was a palm tree, it wasn't a pillar, and it wasn't Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi, it was Rabbi Elazar, but Rabbi Yossi. V'lo shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat hava, ele shel motzi Shabbat b'Shabbat hava. And it wasn't the Friday afternoon praying the Mariv service for Friday night, praying early before sunset on Friday afternoon. Rather, it was the Mariv of Motzi Shabbos before sunset on Saturday night. Tefillah to Erev ein la keva. The Mishnah says that the evening prayer, there's no time for it. It's just all night long. You're free to pray the evening prayer. My ein la keva. What does it mean? There's no specific hour. Ilema di'ibayi matzali kule laila leitne tefillah to Erev kol lelia. If you say that if one wishes he may pray throughout the night, then let the Mishnah teach the evening prayer may be recited throughout the night. Rather, what is the meaning of it not being fixed? Lo keva. Kamandamar tefillah taravit reshut. It's in accordance with the opinion of the one who said the evening prayer is optional. Damar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, tefillah taravit, Rabban Gamliel omer chova, Rabbi Yeshua omer reshut. The Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua disagree. Rabban Gamliel says it's obligatory. Rabbi Yeshua says it's optional. Amar Abaye, halakha kedivrei haomer chova. Abaye says no. The evening prayer is according to halacha. The evening prayer is obligatory. Halakha kedivrei haomer chova. Amar Rava Amar halakha kedivrei omer reshut. But according to Rava, we say that the evening prayer is optional. What's the halakha l'maaseh? the evening prayer is optional, as per the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua in his dispute with Rabban Gamliel, and the opinion of Rabbi in his dispute with Abaya. This is in accordance with the accepted halachic principle. Although it is optional, there is still a mitzvah to recite this prayer, and it should not be missed. The Rif writes that now that all of Israel has accepted upon themselves to recite Mariv, the evening prayer, it has become obligatory like the morning and afternoon prayers. Tanu Rabbanan, Maaseh b'talmid echad sheba lifnei Rabbi Yeshua v'amar lo tfilat aravit reshut o chava? Amar lo reshut. A student came before Rabbi Yeshua and he asked, is Mariv, is it reshut or chava? Is it optional or is it obligatory? And Rabbi Yeshua answered him back, it's optional. They asked Rabban Gamliel, is the Mariv, is it Reshut or Chovah? Is it optional or obligatory? Amar lo Chovah. He said, Rabban Gamliel said it's obligatory. Amar lo Vahalo Rabbi Yeshua, Amar Reshut. They said, but Rabbi Yeshua said it's optional. Amar lo Hamten ad shia kansu balit trisin lebeta midrash. She said, wait, I see the problem. Just wait until the masters of the shields, reference to Torah scholars who battle the words of Torah, enter to the study hall, at which point we will discuss this issue. Balit trisin. It's a very interesting word. Rabbi Steinsaltz points out that it comes from the Greek word terusos, thuresos. Sorry, I can't read Greek very well. Thuresos. He puts the Greek and the transliteration. I think I could at least read the transliteration. Thuresos. No, thureos. So, I can't say this. Thureos. Now I'm going to start learning Greek. Bli neder, which with me usually means no. Thureos means a large shield. Keepers of the shields are the ones who hold those shields. In other words, warriors. They're warriors of the Torah. Keshenichlesu bali trisin amad Shmuel v'sha'al tfilat aravit reshut uchava. When the Torah warriors came into the study hall, they asked Shmuel. Shmuel stood up and he asked them, tell me, is the Aravit prayer optional or obligatory? Amar lo Rabban Gamliel chava. Amar lehem Rabban Gamliel chachamim klum yesh adam shecholek b'davar zeh. Amar le Rabbi Yeshua lav. Amar lo v'halo mishimcha amru lo reshut. Is the evening prayer optional? Rabban Gamliel said it's obligatory. In order to ascertain whether or not Rabbi Yeshua still maintained his position, Rabban Gamliel said to the sages, is there any person who disputes this matter? Rabbi Yeshua said to him, no one disagrees. It's Rabban Gamliel says it's obligatory. So then Rabban Gamliel turns to the sages. Does anyone disagree with me? Said no. The sages said no. Obligatory. In deference to the Nasi, Rabban Gamliel, they wanted to respect the head of the Sanhedrin, the leader of Israel. So they didn't argue with him publicly. You don't make a public argument with the Nasi of the Sanhedrin. Everybody's standing around there and saying, no, you're wrong, blah, blah, blah. No, only a fool would do such a thing. They want to argue him, they can go into his private chambers or at his home, and they can discuss it with him behind closed doors, but you don't make a scene right there in front of everybody. And that's the Tzion L'Nefesh Chaya, a great commentary. Rabbi Gamliel said to Rabbi Yeshua, V'halo mishimcha amru lo li reshut. Rabbi Gamliel said to Rabbi Yeshua, but was it not in your name that they told me that the evening prayer is optional? So he knew that they didn't agree with him. Rabbi Gamliel was just playing with Rabbi Yeshua a little bit. Amar le Yeshua, Amar al raglecha, v'ya'idu b'cha. Amdu Rabbi Yeshua al raglav Amar, imale ani chai v'hu met. וכל החי להכחיש את המת, יכול החי להכחיש את המת? ועכשיו שאני חי והוא חי, Heach yichol achai, lachish et achai. Rabban Gamliel said to Rabbi Yeshua, Yeshua, stand on your feet and we will testify against you. Rabbi Yeshua stood on his feet and said, if I were alive and the students were dead, the living can contradict the dead? The living can indeed contradict the dead, and I could deny this ruling. Because Rabbi Yeshua had said what? Optional. And Rabbi Gamliel said obligatory. So Rabbi Yeshua stood on his head, and if I were alive and the student were dead, I can't contradict the student because he's dead. He can't answer for himself. I can't deny what he said because he's not there to defend himself. No, sorry, that's wrong. If I were alive and the student were dead, then I can contradict the dead. I could deny that ruling because he's dead. He has nothing to say, and I can deny it. Now that I'm alive and he is alive, how can the living contradict the living? I have no choice but to admit that I said it. Yes, I said that the evening prayer is reshut, against the opinion of the Nasi. Remember, everyone in the Sanhedrin gets one vote. So the Nasi gets one vote, just because the Nasi's opinion. If the Nasi wins the argument, and then the other, that's different. He convinces them to vote like him, but they would never vote with him like him, just stam because, for no other reason, because he's the leader. No, it has to because it makes sense, because it works out. היה רבן גמליאל יושב ודורש, רבי יהושע עומד על רגליו עד שריננו כל העם ואמרו לחוצפית התורגמן עמוד עמד. In the meantime, Rabban Gamliel, as the Nasi, was sitting and lecturing, and Rabbi Yeshua all the while was standing on his feet, because Rabban Gamliel did not tell him he could sit down yet. He remained standing in deference to the Nasi. This continued for some time until there arose great resentment against Rabban Gamliel, and all of the people assembled began murmuring and said to Chutzpit the disseminator, stop conveying Rabban Gamliel's lecture. And he stopped. The disseminator is like the translator. He listens. There are a lot of people there. Rabban Gamliel speaking. Maybe he's an old man and his voice does not project. Or maybe he's a young man and his voice doesn't project. You need somebody to speak with a powerful voice, an orator who can hear exactly what the Nasi says and communicate it to the hundreds of people present. His name was Chutzpit the disseminator, Chutzpit the Turgaman. And Rabbi Chutzpit, one of the sages of the Mishnah, you can look him up in Shvi'it chapter 10. He's known as Rabban Gamliel's Turgaman, his translator, his announcer. That position entailed more than merely repeating. It's more than just repeating the sage's lecture aloud. He also explained it. It wasn't just like, listen, say it over. Listen, say it over. No, he was an expert sage in his own right, and he had the ability to explain the Nasi's words. He could, because the Nasi might speak in concise and cryptic statements in the course of the lecture. But because of Chutzpit's skill in explaining Rabbi Gamliel's lectures, Rabbi Chutzpit was called the mouth that produced pearls. He was a tremendous orator, a tremendous sage. We know nothing else about him except that he died as one of the 10 martyrs at the hands of the Roman Empire. Amri ad kama netzar'ea v'nezil. The Gemara relates that in their murmuring they said, how long will Rabban Gamliel continue to afflict Rabbi Yehoshua? V'rosh Hashanah eshtekad tza'areh b'vechorot b'ma'aseh de Rabbi Tzadok tza'areh hachanami tza'areh ta v'na'avreh. Regarding the first, he said, last year in Rosh Hashanah he afflicted him. Rabban Gamliel ordered Rabbi Yeshua to come to him carrying his staff in his bag on his own calculation of the new year, which was different than Rabbi Yeshua's calculations. So Rabban Gamliel, to exert his authority, told Rabbi Yeshua, the day that you say is Yom Kippur, you're going to come carrying your staff in your bag, breaking the laws of Yom Kippur and coming to me. And that will be a way of your admitting that you were wrong about the calendar and I am right. That was very difficult for Rabbi Yeshua. and then the murmuring in the Sanhedrin and all the students in the where they would meet continued. I don't know exactly historically where the Sanhedrin was in Rabban Gamliel's. It was after the destruction of the temple, so it certainly wasn't in Jerusalem. It was perhaps in Yavne, perhaps in Tiberia, perhaps somewhere else. I don't know. Sipori, I don't know. You have to look up the history books for where Rabban Gamliel sat with the Sanhedrin. So if you want to have a visual image of what this looked like, they were in a big meeting place with a lot of people, and 71 sages and all the students and anyone else who wanted to listen. So the murmur and the whole crowd was murmuring in regard. They also said they afflicted regarding the firstborn in the incident involving the question of Rabbi Tzadok. He afflicted him just as he did now, and made him stand up again as punishment for his failure to defend his own differing position. Rabbi Yeshua didn't defend his position well enough. So in punishment, Rabban Gamliel didn't allow him to sit down. Here too he is afflicting him now in this case, because he teaches that the Aravit the evening prayer is Reshut, where Rabban Gamliel says it's Chova, obligatory, and he says it's optional. He's making him stand up because of a different opinion. We have to remove Rabban Gamliel from his position as Nasi of the Sanhedrin. And this is going to be a cliffhanger, and in the next Daf Yomi, you're going to find out just who they put in his place and how that happened. Shalom u'bracha Yerushalayim.